Throughout the vast number of video games that have existed in the world, few are recognized for their lack of a common feature. Jumping. No, not that type of jumping. Much better. Jumping is an action that many of us do in video games without even thinking about it. This makes it one of the most important things to add across all video games, regardless of the genre. Respawnables, like many others out there, is an exception to this rule and has managed to find its own success as a third-person shooter game. That was until... yeah. In this video, let's imagine what would happen if players in Respawnables were given the ability to jump during matches. We will examine the effect it would have on the game, possible changes done to make it stand out, and how it could benefit or hurt its reputation. Here is what would happen if Digital Legends added jumping to Respawnables. Now, when looking at how jumping would specifically affect Respawnables, we need to look at what happens if other games lack this ability. Let's take a look at the original Donkey Kong and imagine it without a jump button. Right off the bat, you see that we already run into quite a problem. By removing Mario's ability to jump, the player is forced into only using ladders, which would not be a problem until you realize that the ladders can only do so much in protecting you from barrels, and the fireballs that are constantly hunting you down. Now you might be wondering, well, Mouse, Donkey Kong only has 4 levels, so it can't be that hard to beat the game without jumping, right? Right? Unfortunately, the best attempt was done performing only one jump to beat it in its entirety by Ansel G in this video, which you can find the link for in the description below. So it's clear that depending on the structure of your game, jumping can either help or not add anything to the overall experience. Respawnables being a shooter game would have the privileges other shooter games get, like going over platforms, items, and explosions of course. Dodging attacks from your fellow opponents would become much easier given how jumping is much faster to do than just simply moving to the side. However, fall damage will likely be the same given how Digital Legends gave Respawnables a fairly consistent system when it came down to fall damage. If you were to take this and put it on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being useless and 10 being a must, jumping would probably hit 5 since we don't know how well Digital Legends could do, which is shown given their track record when it came to upgrading Respawnables. Given the many instances of pay-to-win weapons added to the inventory, it's safe to say that it's possible that there could be different versions of jumps that require payment to become more powerful as you play. At this point, I think it's important to point out the obvious. Not all jumps are the same. There are many different ways to go about this, not just in the style of it. Factors like distance, height, and strength determine how your character moves. Take a look at Mario throughout his games, and you'll notice how his jumps evolve throughout his life, each one giving off more style and feeling. The triple jump is probably his most iconic jump performed across all Nintendo games. It's not just the completion of this skill, but how he moves with the flow that makes the performance way more satisfying to do. Let me ask you something, which looks more fun to do? This? Or this? I'll leave it up to you to answer. Now of course, Respawnables isn't a platform game, hence why you don't see any boss fights, unless you count Bronco or Whiplash I guess. Being a third-person shooter game means that restrictions have to be placed unless the developers are creative with how they program every movement. Given the size of the characters and the maps, Digital Legends likely would opt for the traditional kind of jumps you see in most first-person shooters. Even if updates were to slightly alter this, it would be very limiting to avoid scenarios that would break the game. Just imagine someone was able to jump here when you got them cornered. I don't think that would be very fun for you, would it? Now as for what they would visually look like, my idea is something resembling this. Would these look cool? Probably, but there's a reason why the game stuck with just walking. After looking at all the possibilities of what can be done with jumping in video games, it's time to answer the question of the video. What if Respawnables allowed jumping? Now, answering this question is pretty tricky because we can't exactly know whether or not Digital Legends would have accepted this ability to begin with, and that's assuming that Activision didn't buy them out and shut down the game. For the sake of this video, let's just say that this did happen in some alternative timeline. What would their version of jumping look like? Well, we can say for certain that in terms of how powerful players can jump, it likely would be the typical speed you'll find in Roblox Arsenal. Why is that, you ask? If we take a look at maps across Respawnables, we notice that they have a similar size to those in Roblox Arsenal. Even the Sandtown knockoff is the same size. Hold up. Roblox has some explaining to do. Back to what I was saying, the speed for Arsenal can work for turning corners, and falling could work in Respawnables if the execution was adjusted to the game's theme. Now surprisingly, of all the complaints I have for Arsenal, the speed and jump mechanics aren't one of them. Or, well, I should say 2 of them. Actually maintaining this within the game will inevitably lead to hackers hacking the code to become more advanced than other players. Looking back at how many hackers Digital Legends failed to stop, it's safe to say that this will end up just like what happened with Respawnables during the time of COVID. Hackers will run rampant, leading to more hackers emerging vying for a shot at victory. As for those who casually play... No matter how you look at it, Respawnables allowing jumping in their game would honestly do nothing to change the game as a whole. Look, I like being able to go one block higher in shooter and non-shooter games just as much as the other guy, but let's be honest. Respawnables was able to carve its own path of fame without ever using a jump button. I think that should speak for itself how you can do the same for your own game with the right setups and execution to make whatever you create work in the final product. As someone who's tried to play video games without jumping when it wasn't meant to be that way, I can assure you that the opposite is also true. I hope you guys enjoyed my analysis on this. I'm your host, The Mouse, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.